on December 4th of this year, she went into the doctor for because her breathing was very troubled, and she has asthma, so it was not unusual for her breathing to be troubled, but she kept telling me it's not like an asthma attack, it's something different. She said, it's just kind of strange. So we went to the doctor, and the doctor did the test, and she said, the test won't come back till tomorrow, but I'm sure it's COVID, so we want to take her to the hospital now. So we went to the hospital, and well, actually, they called an ambulance. They took her to the hospital, and when they wouldn't let me go they wouldn't let me go into the ambulance. A couple of days passed, they wouldn't let me into the hospital, and after about 2.5 days, they called me and they said they're going to put her on a ventilator, and she got on the phone with me, and she just said, I'm scared, I wish you were here to hold my hand, and they wouldn't let me in to hold her hand. And I'm trying to get through this unemotionally, but I went into that hospital room, I'm sorry, she went into that hospital, and they put her on the ventilator, and that was the last time I spoke to her. They put her into an induced coma, and after about a day and a half of this, I got a video from a friend of mine about ivermectin. I had never heard of it. This is why it's important for you people to be here, and why it's important for all of us to know all of this, because I knew none of this. And I'm a victim, although I don't call myself a victim, but I'm a victim of the mis and non-information because I didn't educate myself. And so a friend of mine sent me a video about ivermectin, and I went to the hospital. The doctor called me in for a meeting because he wanted to talk about talk about some blood transfusion or something. Every time they wanted to do another thing, they called me and asked me for permission. Well, called me in and asked me to come in, and I went in and I told her I want her to have ivermectin. And the doctor refused at first, and I've just hammered him the entire time. There was a doctor and 2 nurses in the room and a person from the hospital administration, and I just kept saying, I don't care what you say, I want her to have this. Well, finally, after persisting for an hour, the doctor finally looked at the one dose and said, okay, give her 1 dose. And they did. They gave her 1 dose of ivermectin. The next day, the infectious disease doctor called me and said, she's doing better. She's starting to have a little bit of a turnaround. Her oxygen level went from 88 to 95, and then eventually to 100%. And he said, she seems to be, what he told me was all the signs are moving in the right direction. And the only thing that was different from what they had done was give her 1 dose of the ivermectin. Well, 2 days later, a doctor called me and said, your wife is very sick. She's horribly sick. Now, before this, they had called me in the hospital and told me, they said, we'll give you 5 minutes with your wife because she's going to die tonight. She's the sickest person in this hospital. And the next day, she was doing better after the ivermectin. Well, I get a phone call from this doctor that I didn't know and I hadn't had any dealing with, and he said, your wife is very sick. And I said, well, I understand that. And he said, no, I want you to know she's going into organ failure. And I said, well, I wasn't aware of that. I said, the infectious disease doctor told me yesterday that all her signs were moving in a better direction. And he started yelling, I don't see that. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know where you're getting that from. And I told him, I said, from the infectious disease doctor. And I said, and also, I have been telling them from the beginning, I want her to be administered ivermectin. And this doctor said to me, I was standing in my kitchen, I'll never forget it. I was standing in my kitchen talking to this doctor, and I said, I want her to have ivermectin. And he said, oh, you want? Why don't I just pour motor oil down her throat? Maybe that'll help. And, she was in the 7th floor of UTMB Hospital, and I thought, if I was in that building with that doctor right now, I'd throw him out the window. And so I finally just hung up. I couldn't talk to this guy anymore. I hung up, and as I hung up, the nurse from the hospital called me, and almost instantly. And I asked her, I said, is any of what this other doctor told me true, that her signs are getting better? And she said, yes. So I was very confused. And then I went to they called me in for another meeting. This time there were 2 doctors, 2 nurses, and a hospital administrator. And I begged them, I told them, I did everything but get on my knees. I said, I demand you give her ivermectin. I demand you do something. And they just looked at me like I was crazy. They just treated me like I was completely insane. And I told, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you think, I don't care what you tell me. If you can't tell me that this is going to hurt her, then I want her to have it. And they just looked at me, and I told the lady from the administration, I want this in the record. I want you to write this down. I want you to write this date down. I am demanding that you give it to her. And I said, I can't make you do anything, but I want it on the record that I have not only asked for it, but I begged you for it, and I demanded it from you. Well, long story, even longer, she didn't get the ivermectin, and in the meantime, I had called Michael Berry. Becky heard me on the Michael Berry show. She called me. She got in touch with Dr. Ernst. Dr. Ernst and Dr. Armstrong, I guess, spoke. Dr. Armstrong came to the hospital, saw my wife. I didn't know who he was. I walked into she had been transferred out of COVID. She was COVID-free, and she was transferred out of COVID into across the street to Kender Hospital to a long-term care hospital, and they finally took her out of the COVID ward, and I was allowed to go in. And 2 weeks ago Friday, I sat in the room and I held my wife's hand while she took her last breath. And I can't stop thinking that these doctors were responsible for killing my wife, for refusing her life-saving treatments, and that doctor had the nerve to equate ivermectin with pouring motor oil down her throat. Kenny came to my house and talked to me and did a video, and he asked me, why do you think that is? Why do you think these doctors, are withholding these life-saving drugs? And the only thing I can think of is follow the money. They're evil, you're right. Follow the money. There's no money in ivermectin. There's no money in hydroxychloroquine. They're making hundreds of billions of dollars on vaccines. Why would they, hundreds of billions of dollars? Why would they give you a 10-cent dose of a drug that might save you when they can scare everyone and give them a vaccine that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars? I'm telling you, we're being played. Amen. I think I don't know that my wife would be alive today. I don't know. I can't say that she would be alive today if they would have done what they did, but they can't tell me she wouldn't. And anybody that's going through anything